Welcome to Talk with Tara, the podcast where we dive into the bold, the funny, and the fascinating. I'm Tara, your host, bringing you unfiltered conversations on life, love, and everything in between. Hit that follow button so you're always in the loop. And now let's get started. Hello, Erin Hwasta. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, Tara. How are you today?
I am well. So today I am excited to announce I have Erin on. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 15 years of experience helping individuals, couples, and families navigate trauma, addiction, and relationship challenges. She's trained in EMDR therapy, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. She specializes in healing past wounds and breaking unhealthy patterns. Erin has extensive experience working with survivors of sexual abuse and addiction-related issues, offering compassionate, evidence-based support to those struggling in their marriages and personal lives. So just a quick disclaimer, the information in this episode is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health, medical, or legal advice. While Erin is a licensed marriage and family therapist, this discussion does not establish a therapist-client relationship. If you're struggling with trauma, addiction, or relationship issues, please seek support from a qualified professional. If you are in crisis, reach out to a crisis hotline or trusted support network. So with that, Erin, welcome. And before we get started, can you tell us what inspired you to become a family therapist, a trauma therapist especially? I'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
Sure, of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And my background and how I got into this field is that when I was in a class in my bachelor's degree at San Jose State, there was a professor who had a class called Love, Sex, and Power. And I helped kind of TA or helped her with the class a little bit. And I learned so much about the dynamics that go into relationships, specifically unhealthy and abusive relationships. And then she had a speaker come in who was from San Francisco, Women Against Rape. And I was really awed by her and thought she was doing great work. And so when I moved to San Francisco, when I got married and was living in San Francisco, I became a rape advocate with San Francisco Women Against Rape and was going into hospitals for rape kits and interviews with police. And then decided I wanted to become a therapist and do my grad school. And so when I was in grad school, part of it is a practicum. And where I did my practicum was at the YWCA in San Jose. And they also have a rape crisis center. So I tended to get a lot of the clients from the rape crisis center. They got, 8 sessions, I think. And then they would get put over to me in the counseling department for more ongoing therapy. From working with so many clients with sexual trauma, complex trauma then became a specialty. And then because of that, dissociation also became a specialty. So those are the ways that I'm working in the field right now.
And one of the reasons that I was really intrigued and wanted to interview you is because many people get into relationships and they don't realize that their partners may have experienced trauma. And this can really affect a relationship. And usually, especially men, and I don't want to generalize because there are those men who are very verbal and open, but in general, if we want to stereotype men,
of course,
they tend to be more closed. And if they've had trauma, they put it in the back burner and they don't talk about it. And it doesn't surface until they have triggers in a relationship or in a marriage. And even then, sometimes they're reluctant to go to therapy. And then addiction, it could be manifest in drug use. It could be manifest in pornography addiction, sex addiction, alcohol addiction, so many different kinds of work addiction. And it can manifest in that way and it can really affect a marriage. And so I was really intrigued on I wanted to talk about the EMDR as well, because it's a treatment people aren't as familiar with. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to talk about how to deal with a partner who may have trauma. But before we do that, how does therapy, in your opinion, work? What I've been told is it's awareness. It's not like you're going to go to therapy and all of a sudden you're going to walk out and be a different person. You have to have awareness that you have these issues and you have to be willing to look at that and then make small shifts. But love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a number of things that go into what makes therapy efficacious. I think one of them is the relationship with the therapist. And sometimes that in itself can be very healing for people who weren't able to be seen with non-judgmental eyes or with that view of unconditional positive regard. They might have had a very critical parent or just didn't ever really get that. And so having a relationship with someone, an experiential and in the moment relationship with someone, can be healing in and of itself. I think some of the things you brought up can also be helpful. Sometimes people process differently. If they process externally, saying the words out loud might be really helpful for them to work through whatever it is that they're thinking about or feeling about. And having a space where you can freely do that can be really helpful. EMDR therapy is a little bit different than more traditional talk therapies. And one of the things that EMDR therapy can really help you with is it helps people overcome trauma by allowing the brain to reprocess or process distressing memories and events from the past, and allows your brain to see those things that happened in a healthier way. We're not going to make them positive, right? A negative memory is always going to be negative, but it might allow your brain to see it in a more age-appropriate way. Oftentimes, things that happen to us happened in childhood, and so we have the perspective of a child when they happen. Unfortunately, that often gets stuck in that position. And we very rarely go back and revisit those and kind of update the traumas that we had throughout our life so that when we look at them from an adult perspective, we're reacting as an adult. Instead, we're still reacting to the events that happened way back then, still as a child. And so EMDR therapy really helps us to get to a place in our brain where we can see things from an adult perspective, and the events that happen to us don't affect us in the same way. There's a thing, and we can get into it at a later time, about transitioning from what we call traumatic memory into narrative memory. And EMDR therapy is very good about that.
The difference?
Yeah. So our traumatic memory, if you go through something that's traumatic, and there are many different definitions for what trauma is. In EMDR speak or trauma-informed therapists, we often talk about big T traumas and small T traumas. Big T traumas are the things like a rape, a car accident, war, genocide, things that everyone is going to agree that that is probably a traumatic situation and that you would expect someone to have symptoms of PTSD because of it. Small T traumas are things that build over time. That might be a bully that you had in third grade. It might be, like I mentioned before, having a highly critical parent, right? These things start stacking on top of each other, and they become what can turn into symptoms of PTSD, even though the event itself, each event within itself is not going to necessarily be considered to be maybe big enough or severe enough to cause something like PTSD.
You bring up a really interesting point, because why is it, I've always wondered this, why is it that one person, let's take the Menendez brothers, they had, let's say what they said was true, and they had, horrible, horrendous childhood, and they killed their parents. But somebody could have the same thing happen to them, and they end up living a normal life. They end up, getting a job and getting married, and they don't deal with the trauma in that way. Why are some people able to take so much trauma and some people just cannot handle it?
I think it's a great question. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that, but I will tell you the severity of the event doesn't always correlate with the symptoms or the outcome or how someone responds to it. But what does often correlate is how that person internalizes what happened, what they believe about themselves, and what they then believe about the world around them based on what happened to them.
Okay. So it depends on all the constructs around you that have formed from childhood, and,
Exactly.
Some people have more grit, like they say, the more grit you have, the better it is to deal with adult issues. And the less grit you have as a kid, if you handhold your kids or you're a helicopter mom, I've read this, then when your kids get into college and somebody breaks up with them, it's life shattering. I mean, it's just devastating. But another kid that's had more grit and has grown up in a kind of a tougher environment, they can deal with a breakup, no problem, because they've had other issues that they've had to deal with as a young kid.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with what they internally believe about themselves, right? Child abuse for one person, they might internalize, my parents are just bad people. They don't know how to be parents. They're not very good at this, right? That's not a whole lot about them.
Right.
Another child who's experiencing child abuse might say, this is my fault. I did something to deserve this. Or the world is not safe, right? And they internalize those things. And then as they move through their world, And as years stack on top of years and experiences stack on top of experiences, it's reinforcing that idea that I'm bad, I did something wrong, and the world is unsafe.
Okay, good. And then I interrupted you and you were going to
That's
say
okay.
something and I don't.
Yeah, I think I was talking about narrative memory versus traumatic memory. So if you think about traumatic memory and there was a trauma, it could be a compilation of many things or a single incident trauma. That trauma often gets stored because our brain gets overwhelmed in the moment. That trauma gets stored, or that memory gets stored in a way where all the sights and sounds and raw sensory data is still present. So when someone thinks about something very traumatic, say a rape or a sexual assault, when they think of it, they might feel the hands around their neck again, right?
Oh, wow.
They might feel their body going into a panic again. They might hear the heavy breathing in their ear again, right? These things in their raw sensory form will come back up. We often call that a flashback. In narrative memory, if you think about what you ate for lunch yesterday, right? You can probably remember what it was. You can probably remember how it tasted, but you're not tasting it again. You're not feeling it in your hand, right? So that's narrative memory, where it kind of gets wrapped up and the raw sensory information is not present, is not as strong. And EMDR therapy does a really amazing job of helping our brain transition traumatic memory into the narrative memory. So we remember the things that happened, we remember what it looked like, but the importance of it and the reaction that we have to it is not the same. And we're not getting the sensation that it's happening again and in the present moment.
That's a really good example that you gave. Wow. How does it work? I mean, you're basically blinking, right?
There's a number of different ways to do it. There is a technique called the flash technique where you do blinking. Standard protocol EMDR therapy, which is traditionally mostly what I'm practicing. You do eye movements, and the eye movements go back and forth from one corner of your eye to the other corner of your eye, oftentimes following a therapist's hand, or some people will use a light bar. Today's a day and age in the virtual world. Sometimes there are platforms on the computer where you follow a ball that goes back and forth or something that moves back and forth. But the eye movements go back and forth. There's a number of ideas or hypotheses about why that is helpful for our brain. One is that it puts our brain into a processing mode, similar to the processing mode we have when we dream or have REM sleep, and our eyes go back and forth. We know from different studies that that is a time that our brain is pairing information, organizing information, and reacting to things that happened through our day or whatever's coming up. That often can lead to very strange dreams, right? Because like this information from this piece of today and that information from 5 years ago, like all of a sudden we're creating a story to make it all make sense. But with EMDR therapy, we take what your brain already knows how to do in REM sleep, but we decide the information that we want it to process or reprocess. So we're going to bring up a specific memory, that time that your dad yelled at you when you were 3 years old. We're going to get that memory network really lightened up by asking about what's the image, what are some of the thoughts that you have about yourself, what feelings do you feel, where do you feel them in your body? We're going to have you do some rating systems to help us understand what's going on. And then we're going to have you follow our fingers. That's going to put your brain into that reprocessing mode, and it's going to process that specific memory that we're targeting. Another theory about it is that there's an orienting response. And the orienting response theory says we bring up this scary, bad, negative, overwhelming memory that you have in your mind. And then we have you follow something that's like super boring, right? And so the brain follows my hand, say, and after a while it goes scary. That's not scary. Scary. No, that's not scary. And it eventually makes the very scary memory seem not scary or less reactive, right? Or less whatever it is that we're trying to, whatever that memory was bringing up for you. So there's many different ways of why we think this works. There's another theory about taxing the working memory, that you can't hold the distressing memory in your mind for very long if you're doing this as well. And so then it kind of falls away and becomes less important and less sensory, and all that raw sensory information starts kind of decreasing and becomes much easier to manage and think about that memory.
That's amazing. I mean, who discovered?
A woman named Francine Shapiro discovered it. And she was very upset by something and took a walk And as she was walking, noticed that her eyes were kind of darting back and forth. And she realized after this walk that she felt much calmer. She was a grad student at the time, and so turned this into an experiment and started experimenting with other people. Does this work for you too? Started experimenting with herself. If I think up the worst thing and then I start doing this thing with my eyes, or, take a walk and do this thing with my eyes, does it still help? And did a lot of research on it. It's evidence-based at this point. Yeah, she, an amazing woman, and had this great story and discovered this amazing thing that our brains can do.
Gosh, that's amazing. I mean, it was meant for her to discover that because it helps so many people going through trauma. You're a family therapist. I'm sure you've seen a lot of couples, and why they're deciding if they want to stay or leave a marriage. What's some advice you can give someone who's having this quandary? How do they know it's really time to leave a marriage? Because a lot of people are in limbo for many years, or they wait until their kids are old enough and then they decide to leave. Yeah. Do you see clients like this who are just like confused and stuck?
I absolutely do. I don't see a lot of couples. So I don't do a lot of couples work. I do much more individual work, but that's often an issue that comes up with my individual clients as well. And unfortunately, for most people, there's no way to know for sure that it's time to leave the marriage. I think it's a case-by-case basis. I think there's a lot of factors that come into play. And for some people, it's really clear that I'm not getting what I need out of this marriage. My partner's not getting what they need out of this marriage. It's time to really dig in and see if we want to change this or look into it or just walk away. For other people, they might not have that perspective and know that it was the right choice for them for years after a divorce or after a split. It's different for everybody. Some people, it's very clear, and for some people, it's just not as clear. There's some people, I would find, unfortunately, some of my male clients, more than my female clients, regret that they lost the marriage or that they gave up on it and find that they wish they still had it. And there's a grieving process that we go through about that for them. And so everybody's a little bit different. Humans are so complicated just in of themselves. And so then you add another committed person to that, and it just makes everything much more complicated. And then you add children in there if it's relevant, and it just exponentially makes it more and more complicated. So it's very hard to give one answer. I think it is a very simple construct. I often will talk to my clients about the individual factors that go into whether this relationship is healthy and functioning. And then the relationship dynamics, we take a really close look at relationship dynamics and talk about, is this healthy, unhealthy, or an abusive type relationship? And then we also talk a lot about, are there deal breakers or no-goes is what I often talk to clients about.
Okay. What's the difference between a no-go and a deal breaker? I mean, we know a deal breaker is like absolutely like, you're seeing another woman. I'm not into open marriages. Deal breaker.
Absolutely.
What's a no-go?
Yeah. So the no-goes I talk about with my clients are the things that would prevent you from leaving. The things that there's absolutely no way that I could leave as long as this is present, right? There's a lot of people who, I will say from my practice, I've seen women, if they got married young, focused on the kids, they might not have the career or the financial stability to be able to leave the marriage and be able to still have a lifestyle that they feel like is safe for their children. And so that might be a no-go for them. So it might be that we're working on what are some ways, what are some skills that you need to build in order to see, can you get into the workforce? Is there a way that you can come up with or find a way to manage or get enough experience to be able to get to a level where you can make enough money for you to be able to live comfortably or at least safely with your children. For some, it's religiously motivated. There's no way I can ever because of my religion. And so it's a matter of talking about that. Is that something that you are looking to question, to deconstruct, or is that something that you are just going to live with and decide that that's not an option for me? And that's fine. But you have to know, are there no-goes there where people are unwilling to or unable to leave?
Okay. So I was thinking the no-go was like the deal breaker was absolutely, I can't handle this. And the no-go was something that's just annoying that somebody could live with. So a no-go is basically, I can't leave because of these reasons.
That's right.
Totally get it. It makes sense. I mean, I hear a lot of women. I have a woman that I know in particular who said she went to see a divorce attorney and he said, don't leave your marriage. You can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
You know, if you want this
Unfortunately.
lifestyle, don't leave.
Yeah.
And so she was stuck. She felt stuck.
Yeah.
That's just not a way to be. It's just,
I
I hear
agree.
these
And
stories and it just
I
gets
know.
me
And so
down.
it's my job to sit with people in that stuckness, right? And
Ugh,
help them find ways to manage it. Because it's not my job to tell them what they should or shouldn't do with their
right.
marriage or in their life, but helping them manage, I am stuck here and this is not fulfilling me is a tough place to be.
Well, I know a number of people, and I've heard stories from friends of friends of people who are with people who may have alcoholism in their marriage
Mhm.
when either, the woman or the man may be drinking too much. So if they don't do a 12-step program and cut the alcohol completely, I'm not talking about social drinking occasionally. I'm talking about someone who's really an alcoholic. How do you stay with someone who may have an addiction, or should you? Should you put up with it? I mean, that's kind of a weird question I'm asking, but people stay. They
Absolutely.
stay, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the things that is that a deal breaker for you?
Mm-hmm.
Also, deal breakers change throughout the relationship. It might be a deal breaker when you first get together with someone, but maybe not after you have 4 children with that person.
Right. So what do you do? I mean, with someone, can people combat alcoholism on their own, or do you, as a therapist, is the 12-step program the best way to handle
I think the
an
12-step
addiction?
program certainly is a great way to handle it. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
only way.
Mm-hmm.
There are other modalities that you can use. EMDR therapy does have a good way of handling addiction, but the caveat there is the person who is struggling with the addiction has to be willing to address it, has to
Right.
be willing to address. The other thing that I think is really important is has to be willing to address what's causing the addiction,
Mm-hmm.
because there's often underlying trauma or something else that is causing the person to want to escape from their life, right?
Right.
It's the escape mechanism in whatever form it takes, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's alcohol or it's sex or it's drugs or it's shopping, you name your addiction. It's often a way to escape from what is present, what is real, what is happening in their life. And so, first of all, where did they learn that behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Where did they learn that those things are so difficult that they are unable to manage the things in their life? And then are they willing to look at that? And if they're not, then that's going to be really telling for their partner on how important that relationship is to them and whether or not they want to stay there. It's never my job to tell somebody whether or not to stay with an addicted partner. It's my job to help them see the different avenues and paths that they could take. And it's my job to help them manage the stressors and the complications that come up with being in a relationship with an addicted partner. And so I can't say whether somebody should or shouldn't, but I think it also absolutely adds complexity to their life and makes things difficult. But it's only the person who's the addict that can make those changes.
Right. But what about the person who's attracted to the addict? They can go to certain meetings and they can have their own healing process, right? Like if you're a person who's always attracting someone who has an alcohol problem, I know people who have had one mate after the other. That have been attracted to an alcoholic person.
100%.
And I think that they also can go do their work and figure out, why am I attracting this person? So that, let's say they have left the situation, they don't attract the same person again.
Absolutely. That's one of the categories that I had mentioned before that kind of oversimplifies relationships. The individual factors are what's your own experience, what's your own comfort, what do you accept, what kind of treatment do you accept in relationships. And one of the things about that is oftentimes if you have grown up around someone who struggled with an addiction, that is familiar to you. And
Right.
so you will therefore find other people who treat you that way or have that inconsistency and find that feels familiar. I know how to manage those people. Like I know how to deal with that. I know how to get those people to love me, or at least I can really, really try. And oftentimes they do fall into that pattern of finding these people because they feel familiar. If you can do your own work and understand, A, where did that come from? And B, why am I still responding to that inconsistency in someone's personality with that same awe and wanting to fall in love with them, then you can absolutely shift that pattern.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Is that what trauma bonding is? It's kind of on an unconscious level.
Trauma bonding, there's a couple different ways that people use trauma bonding. Trauma bonding, in some circles, people will talk about, you and I have been through a trauma together, and so that bonds us, but that's really something different. Trauma bonding, if you're talking more in the domestic violence field and looking at dynamics of relationship, is more about in abusive relationships where the person who has the power and the person who does not have the power get so bonded that it feels as if the person who doesn't have the power or the victim is not able to leave because they are so in love, so connected, can't see themselves without this person, even though this person is, to anyone outside the relationship, treating them terribly.
But can trauma bonding also be like a lighter touch? Meaning like you can be attracted to someone who's just not good for you. You know that person's not good for you, but it just feels so right.
I suppose so. It might be a different term. It's certainly along the same flavor, where this person is not really good for you if someone were to look at it on paper from the outside, but it's what you are familiar with. It's what you know. And so that feels right to you.
I highly recommend men and women to do the work, to find a really great therapist that resonates with you and heal yourself, because it's just so wonderful when you do, So I really admire what you do. I think it must feel so rewarding, Erin, right? To help people going through trauma.
It is. It's very fulfilling. And just like you said, when you can help someone find their healthiest self and find them then connecting with other people who are able to match them in their health, it's really, really lovely.
Yeah. So let's say someone is, with a person who has an addiction or someone who does not want to work on their trauma and it's manifesting in something that's not good in the relationship. What are the steps to leave that marriage? We talked about this offline, and I think you said there were 3 choices that people have.
So yeah, one of the things that I go over with clients, again, I don't tell them what to do. That's not my job or position. But if you have a partner who is unwilling to make any of the changes that would make your life better or would make the relationship better, there's kind of 3 choices. One is you can just grin and bear it and do nothing different. Try and do your own work, but not be able to shift or change somebody else. The other is you can do the ultimatum thing. For some people that works. And the other is you can reflect back to them and communicate as clearly as you can. These are my concerns. This is what is really hurting and harming me. And I would love to be able to fix this with you and be able to have a closer connection with you and see if that helps, and invite them to do something a little bit differently or look at some of their issues, even if it's not with a therapist. A therapist is not the only answer for people to do their internal work and get some insight. I think of therapy as a class that you go to that's about you. And for some people, that's not what's helpful for them. Reading books or watching YouTubes or listening to podcasts might be a better way for them to get that information. It's not going to be as personal, but it might be enough for them to make some shifts, or, reading books or things like that. If they're unwilling to do any of those, then again, you have the choice of, do ultimatums, try bribery or negotiations, right? As I have to call it with people.
Right.
If you do this, then maybe we can set up a time to go do that. We can go on a trip together, or we can do this nice thing for the kids that we've wanted to do, whatever it is. But yeah, and then you just have to have them make their choices and decide for now which of those paths are they willing to follow. And that doesn't mean it's forever, but for now, they might try that.
Does when people go through therapy and EMDR, have you noticed that they can heal from this modality? Have you had many clients that have healed? So that's a really good, because when people are going through trauma or they've had PTSD, when they're going through it, they feel like they're never going to heal. Like they feel stuck. Like, oh my God, am I going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life? Like it's just unbearable. It's unbearable to them. I personally know people who've had trauma and experiences, and it's just unbearable. And the fact that they can heal it just must feel so liberating to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it is.
I think it is. And that EMDR therapy is not the only way to heal. A lot of the studies where EMDR therapy is kind of put against some of the other modalities, it tends to be as effective as the other modalities, but it tends to be more efficient. So it happens faster than some of the other modalities. And so that's why I really love it. It's because it's efficient and effective.
Okay. Okay, good. What's some advice that you could give someone who's feeling completely lost in their marriage?
Yeah. So one of the first things to do is really look at what are those individual factors for you, right? What is success in a relationship for you? What does that mean? What might that look like? So what are the individual's needs and wants, and what are their goals? Are they getting those things? Are they not? In what ways are they not, right? What is success for them? What does happiness or fulfillment mean for them? All those things are really important. What is their own history with being vulnerable with other people? Vulnerability is one of the things that creates close connection, creates good and healthy relationships. I had a professor who, I loved it. He would say intimacy is into me, you see. Intimacy as an emotional intimacy, not just sex, obviously. But I love that idea because the amount that you are able to be vulnerable is going to be the amount that you are able to connect to other people. The other things to look at are, where are there incompatibilities between these things, right? If I'm able to be very vulnerable, but my partner is not, it's not going to work very well, because I'm going to continually want that person to be as vulnerable as I'm willing or able to be. And it's going to be really, really frustrating if they're unwilling to do that, or that doesn't feel safe enough to them, right? So looking at all those things, what did I learn in my life, or what did this person learn in their life about how to connect with people, what that's supposed to look like? And then what kind of boundaries are you setting? Do you have no boundaries at all, and you do everything that the other person wants and needs, and your needs are unimportant and their needs are so much more important, right? That's not going to be that's not going to last very long before you start realizing, wait a second, this does not seem very balanced. So looking at all those factors, and then looking at what are the dynamics in the relationship between the two of you. Right? Is there healthy communication? Is there respect? Is there trust? Is there honesty? Is there enjoying personal time together and away from each other? Right? Is there balance in those kinds of things? Is there economic or financial equality? Right? Those things are really important for healthy relationships. Or are you in a more unhealthy relationship where there's not communication? There's some disrespect. You don't trust each other. There might be some dishonesty going on, right? All of these things. Are the economics unequal?
What about sex? What if one person wants sex and the other one doesn't?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a big thing where things are inconsistent. Those are things to know about before making long-term commitments with somebody and trying to build a relationship. Some of those things are just who we are. Some people are much more sexual than others. Some people are really interested, and some people just every now and then is fine, but like, I'm not thinking about it every day.
Right.
So you need to know that between the couple. Is there a match there or not? Is part of that uninterest in sex part of a previous trauma? Or is the over-interest in sex part of a previous trauma, right? That could go either way. So making sure that you're looking at your own history. What am I bringing to this relationship? And then looking at the dynamics of the relationship to see, is it healthy, unhealthy, or are there abusive dynamics going on?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I really like that. Well, this has been really wonderful, Erin. Thank you for your time today. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, I know that you practice in Florida. Does that mean you can see anyone throughout the United States?
No. So unfortunately, in the United States, we're licensed by state as marriage and family therapists.
Oh, okay.
And so I am licensed in California, I'm licensed in Florida, and I'm licensed in the state of Washington. So if someone in those states is looking to get a hold of me, you can find me at my website, which is www.erinhwasta.com. That's ERINHWASTA. It's a tough one. .com. Or you can email me, Erin, at erinhwasta.com. Same spelling.
And I'll also put it in the show notes in case anyone wants to get a hold of you.
Perfect.
Well, you're very soothing, and I really loved our talk and discussion. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me on. This was a pleasure.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to Talk with Tara. If you loved today's episode, follow the show and share it with a friend. Stay tuned. There's so much more to talk about. See you next time.